Hello there. This video will help you to understand how the Nazis rose to power. So you have possibly looked already at the first video, which is on the Weimar Republic. This is now on how the Nazis rose to power, which of course is happening alongside the story of the Weimar Republic. So these are the two things we need to know about. We firstly need to know, why did the Nazi Party grow from 1919 to 1928? So we look at that and we should already be thinking, okay, that's the state of 1 year after the World War has ended. It's the year of the Treaty of Versailles, is when the Nazi Party started to grow. And it ends in 1928, which is another date we should know, and that is, of course, the end of the Golden Age, which was from 1924 to 28. So that's the period of time when the Nazi Party started to grow. And then we've got a second question. Why did support for the Nazis grow from 1929 to 1933? And the reason we've divided this into those two questions is because things changed dramatically in Germany after 1929. 1929, as of course we should know, is the Great Depression after the Wall Street crash. And why 1933? Well, that's the year in January when Hitler became the Chancellor. So we need to look at why the Nazi Party was able to grow when the situation was quite difficult for them, particularly during the Golden Age from 1924 to 28 of the Weimar Republic, but also why they were able to benefit so much from the period of time where things went very badly for the Weimar Republic. Why did the Nazis rise rather than all of the other parties that could also have benefited from the problems faced by the Weimar Republic? Okay, so firstly, let's look at why did the Nazi Party grow from 1919 to 1928. And we're going to look at the four Ps, which will help us to understand how this tiny nationalist party was able to grow from really having almost no members to becoming one of the most powerful parties the world has ever known by the 1930s. How the heck did that happen? And let's look. Well, the first reason this party was able to grow was because of Hitler. Hitler joined the party in 1919 when it was still called the DAP, the German Workers' Party, and he was instrumental. So he was important in helping the party to grow because he had a magnetic personality which attracted people to him. He spoke in thousands of beer halls up and down the country, particularly in the south of Germany, and because of his magnetic personality, more and more people were attracted to the party. Then it would be great to have a statistic, like, for example, numbers increasing from 1,000 in June 1919 up to 3,000 by the end of 1919, most of that down to Hitler, but still, these are tiny numbers, and there are other nationalist parties that are much more powerful at that time. Nationalists, of course, we need to know, nationalists are people who want a strong leader, like the Kaiser, or in this case Hitler, and they also want Germany to have an empire, so to grow in strength and power. Also, the Nazis were masters at standing out from the other parties. There were literally hundreds of other parties around at that time, and we know that from looking at the Weimar Republic. Because of the way that the constitution was created, it meant through the system that they had that it was possible for small parties in proportional representation to gain a number of seats in parliament to have a voice. So how were the Nazis able to stand out from all of these other nationalist parties? Well, because they were masters at publicity. Hitler, for example, created the swastika, which was then used in huge numbers of flags and banners and posters all around the country so that people recognized the party. They also created the salute, the hand salute, the hand raised salute, which meant that they stood out from other parties who just didn't have those ways of being noticed. The Nazis also stood out because they created their own private army, a paramilitary, which has a number of different names, all the same thing. They were called the Stormtroopers. They're called in German the Sturmabteilung, or SA. They're also known as the Brown Shirts. How did that help the Nazis? Well, people liked to join this group because it gave them a sense of purpose. So that was good. Ernst Röhm was a great leader of the stormtroopers when he was their leader up until 1925 and then from 1930. Also, other people were impressed by the stormtroopers because Germany, particularly up to 1924, was in permanent crisis, as we know. There were constant rebellions, there were constant problems that they faced, like hyperinflation. And many people liked this idea of having a strong, forceful party with its own army in place because they would perhaps bring order to Germany. And finally, because the Nazis had really simple policies that attracted members, and they said the same thing again and again, which meant that more and more people understood what they stood for and could begin to vote for them and support them. Their messaging was very simple. Most of it was focused on it not being your fault that you're facing problems. If you're unemployed, it's not your fault. And then they were able to blame people. They said it's not your fault, it's the November criminals, the Weimar Republic leaders. Why? Well, because they have betrayed the country in the Dolchstoss by signing the Treaty of Versailles. They're betraying us. Why? Well, because some of them are Jews, and the Jews can't be trusted. They want to destroy our country, they said. They had this was all in their 25-point program that they created early on in 1920, and then they made things even more simple. 25 points was too many for people to remember, so they changed that and really focused on very simple messaging around it's not your fault, blaming the Weimar Republic. And they did that particularly in 1926 after the Bamberg Conference, where they're focusing less on kind of socialist ideas. The party initially had socialist ideas and nationalist ideas. From 1926 onwards, they're really focusing only on those nationalist ideas. And finally, no longer in the P's, but important, is the Nazis were able to learn from their mistakes and to improve. Something we constantly, of course, tell students to do, but the Nazis did do that. How did they do that? Well, in 1923, they organized the Munich Putsch, sometimes called the Beer Hall Putsch. This was an understandable thing for the Nazis to do because they felt that the Weimar Republic was exceptionally weak because this was the year of hyperinflation. So we connect events in Germany with the Weimar Republic, with the Nazis. That makes sense. The hyperinflation, Germany's leaders incredibly unpopular. That was a good time to organize a rebellion. Also, because they'd seen in Italy that Mussolini was successful with his own putsch and had become a strong nationalist leader in Italy. And finally, because they believed and overestimated the amount of hatred there was towards the Weimar Republic because of the Treaty of Versailles and this idea that the leaders were November criminals. They hated them so much they assumed others did too. But the putsch was a failure because the army did not support them. But they learned their lessons. And the key lesson they learned was let's not use violence to take power. Let's actually try and gain the votes of the people. And by gaining the votes of the people, we will then take charge. We'll get Hitler as our chancellor. And then we can make dramatic changes to the country and really seize power. So they changed their approach, changed their policy from using violence to one of trying to gain electoral support. Now, the Nazi Party, up until 1929, was tiny. 1928, they had 12 seats in the Reichstag, the German parliament. There were over 600 seats. So they were tiny, and we would not, in a million years, be studying the Nazi Party if it hadn't been for events that took place from 1929 onwards, because they would just be forgotten, like all of the other nationalist parties that I'm not teaching you about. So what changed? Well, as we know, 1929, key date for us, was the year when the Wall Street crash happened. And as a result of the Wall Street crash, as we know, the American economy collapsed and they desperately needed the money back that they had provided in loans to Germany. Germany had to pay back the loans too fast. It meant that factories closed. It meant that all of those successes during the Golden Age they came to an end, and Germany's unemployment rate went up hugely very fast. As a result, people lost trust in the Weimar Republic because they remembered those years during a period of hyperinflation when the Weimar Republic leaders let them down. They felt they were doing the same again. So what happened next? Well, people naturally turned to other parties for support. They turned to the communists, the KPD. Others turned to the nationalists. And those who were attracted to the nationalists because they were angry with the Weimar Republic, well, they were attracted mostly to the Nazis at this point, because the Nazis were experts in propaganda, in publicity. They had very simple messaging. It's not your fault. We're being destroyed by these Weimar Republic fools and idiots betraying us. And also our only hope is Hitler, like in this poster. Very simple messaging. Which just attracted lots and lots of supporters during this period of time, which meant that their support rose massively from just 12 seats in 1928 to 1932, where they actually had 230 seats in Parliament. This is a crazy increase. Not yet a majority, because you need over 300 for a majority, but a sign that the Nazis were the most popular party in the country at this point, and also a sign that their success in this simple messaging and propaganda was really working. Finally, naivety. Now, if I am naive and someone who just doesn't really understand the way the world works, and the person who was naive was President Hindenburg. He was an old war leader, and he massively underestimated Hitler because he saw Hitler as an idiot, because Hitler had been a low-ranking soldier in World War I, whereas Hindenburg had been in charge of the whole army. So understandably, he thought that Hitler was beneath him, and which is why when the Weimar Republic suffered all sorts of problems, unable to have a chancellor who was able to keep power because of the huge numbers of people supporting the Nazis and other extremist parties, which you need to look at and understand. There's all these people like Brüning, and then von Papen, and then von Schleicher. They're unable to rule except by decree, so by emergency laws that were agreed by the president. At this time, the president is desperate to try and get someone in power who is a little bit more popular, but he only allows Hitler to become the chancellor in January 1933 because he believed he could control him. And as we will find out, and hopefully you know already, Hitler was not an easy man to control. As soon as he became the chancellor, he took advantage of the situation to become the Führer and so on. But up to January 1933, which is this block, Hitler and the Nazis gained power because of the 4 Ps up to 1928, and then because of the economic collapse, Great Depression, because of their expertise in propaganda, taking advantage of that situation, and finally because Hindenburg was prepared to give Hitler the chancellorship because he believed that he could control him, which turned out not to be the case. There you go.